So if we look at the agenda, Tim, glamorous assistant. So firstly, my boss, Carlton Hopper, will just do a quick intro and introduction to GFT. I'll let him introduce himself. He did give me a bio, but it would spend me five minutes to go through it. And then we go into three keynote speeches. One of those is Tim Bailey from Red Date. Again, I'll let him introduce himself. David Correa from GFT, and then Kalina from Industria. Then we're going to have a small break. Again, an opportunity to network, and then move on to the panel discussion, which is going to be hosted or managed by Richard Dunny from GFT. And again, we'll go for introductions then, and then we'll have some closing remarks, and then importantly, a decent wrap up over something to eat and drink as well. So I think we should crack on really and hand over to Carlton. Oh, you've got one as well.
I got one. Okay. Can you hear me?
Is it on? Oh, it's on. That's James, by the way.
Oh, I didn't introduce myself. From GFT.
Well, afternoon, everybody. So my name's Carlton Hopper. I've got the privilege of running the UK business for GFT. For those of you who don't know GFT, we're a 16-country, 10,000-person digital transformation services company. We sort of do two things. We do engineering really well, a lot of expertise, and increasingly we're doing a lot more discovery and design work. So our clients are asking us to tell them what to do, and in that regard, innovation is a really key part of that story, and technologies like DLT are really quite a big feature of conversations. Got to declare my hand. I was a bit of an early mover in DLT. I was involved in it about 6 years ago in another world. So it's been really interesting seeing how it's evolved over the last 5-6 years, where it's waxed and waned. I certainly feel right now in the UK, there's a bit of a wave again of looking at it and adoption, somewhat spurred on by, I think, two things. First of all, our new Prime Minister is quite was very pro when he was the Chancellor, and obviously looking to protect the UK's position in the City of London as an innovative place. I think that's very helpful. And the second reason is, I think when the market's a bit tougher, which it is right now, if you're an organization, you either hunker down to survive, or you innovate your way to succeed. And I'm glad to say quite a lot of our clients are doing the latter, thankfully. A few, obviously, a bit nervous about the situation, but by and large, most of the clients that we're working with are thinking about how to go faster and more innovative, and I think this sort of technology has a really key role to play in that. One thing I learned, I think, when I was involved 5 years ago, which is predominantly around convening business networks across Europe, is there's two things that you need to get right. You need a lot of expertise, and you need a lot of engagement. So hopefully this afternoon there's some good experts in the room, and you're going to hear some stuff. And most of the day, the afternoon is about allowing you to be able to connect with people. So that's all I really have to say. Thank you for coming to our little office. The first time we've had some external people in here. We'll turn the air conditioning down a little bit because it's going to get a little bit hot, and enjoy the afternoon. Thank you.
So I'm back on mic. Sorry, I should have introduced myself, James Shipley from GFT. And over a drink, I can tell you more about myself. Anyway, over to Tim, who's starting first. Oh, you've got a mic. Okay.
Is that all right? I don't know. Okay. All right. Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah. Good. All right, good. So my name is Tim Bailey. I'm with Red Date Technology. We're headquartered in Hong Kong, and we build digital infrastructures. So I'm in charge of our Hong Kong office and also look after the global expansion of what we're doing with the BSN, with the blockchain-based service network. And I want to first of all thank GFT for hosting us here in your office, and also our partner Industria, who will be up to talk a little bit more about what they're doing later. So I'm going to talk about the BSN and really what the mission behind the BSN is. But I want to start with our view of blockchain technology. And I think when you talk to the average person on the street about what blockchain technology is, particularly over the last 10 days or so, they're going to say cryptocurrency, right? And FTX and stolen money and what's going on. So I want to focus today on blockchain as a technology. What I often say to people is cryptocurrency is an application on blockchain, just as email is an application on the internet. But obviously the internet is much more than email. Blockchain technology is much more than just cryptocurrency. So I'm going to start with a technology that I think most people understand very well, which is phone calls, the phone. The phone was invented back in the 1800s, and it enabled people to be able to have one-to-one conversations across very long distances for the first time. But it was a point-to-point network. And it wasn't until the last probably 20, 30 years when conference calling technology was invented that data and voice could move in a broadcasting fashion, meaning that you could get 10 people together on a call, and one person could speak, and everyone on that call would immediately hear what that person said. One person could react to it, and everyone on that call could immediately understand and hear what the reaction was. So that was a revolutionary step forward in how telephone communication worked. We think that there is a similar revolution that will go on with how IT systems communicate with each other. So today, on the left, you see the way that the internet works today, which is the internet is really a network of back-end IT systems that are connected in a point-to-point manner. On the right is what we see blockchain as doing. The only thing that I've replaced on this slide from the previous slide is I replaced people and phones with computers and IT systems. And so fundamentally what blockchain does, the thing that we believe is the most powerful thing about it, is that it enables data communication in a broadcasting manner, meaning that data can be broadcast and immediately multiple IT systems can recognize and respond to that data. So what's required in a broadcasting data communication? The first point is that the data is broadcast to all parties at one time, immediately. The second is that any reply from the data receiver is also broadcast to all parties who are involved in that network. And the third key point is that any party in that network is aware and knows that everyone in that network has received that data and understood it. So what are the benefits of this from an IT perspective? It's more efficient. It's a more efficient way to communicate information. It's transparent. It's decentralized. And thus it's more trustworthy. And so if you take away one thing from my session today, it's our understanding of how blockchain technology works and what's fundamentally different about it from the internet today. So we actually think that blockchain technology today is in many ways an early version or a not yet mature version. Most blockchain technology today was designed to transfer cryptocurrencies from one point to another point. We believe that blockchain as a technology will evolve and become more sophisticated and be able to then process more complex transactions than just transferring a token from one wallet to another wallet. We believe that what blockchain enables is what we call public IT systems. And the easiest way for me to explain public IT systems is that if you think about the internet today, it's like your house or your flat. If someone wants to communicate with you or visit you, they come to your house, they come to your flat. And any transaction, whatever you do, stays within your private property. That's a private IT system. the analogous to a private IT system. What we're talking about is public IT systems. A public IT system in that same analogy is like a park. It's community owned, people gather there, it's transparent. Even if 3 people wanted to have a private interaction in a park, they could do that. But it's a public setting, just like a public IT system. So we believe that blockchain is just one of the technologies that will enable this public IT system. We believe that there will be new database technologies. We will believe that there will be new types of middleware, new types of standards and protocols that will help proliferate this concept of public IT systems. One example. One of the key things that made the internet successful was standard protocols. Like prior to the internet, you had multiple different private networks. And it wasn't until you got standards like HTTP and TCP that were common industry recognized standards that the internet really grew and proliferated. We think that there will be similar standards that enable public IT systems. So a public IT system, in contrast to the private IT systems that we have today, there will be this new type of system and applications in a public environment controlled by multiple users. That's the revolution. Now, people often talk about Web3, and in fact, some of the presenters who come after me may talk about Web3 as a concept. Web3, in our definition, is not quite the right term to use, because Web3 typically involves cryptocurrencies, and it also implies that Web 2 will go away. And we don't think that will be the case. We think that the future world will still have private IT systems, but also public IT systems, and there'll be a mix. Private IT systems will never go away. A bank, a big e-commerce company will always have some of their data, always have some of their transactions in a private system. So what we really think is happening and will happen over the next 5, 10, 15 years is the internet will become 2 layers. So today, you have the private layer of the internet, which again is a bunch of back-end IT systems, private back-end IT systems that are connected point to point. So what do I mean by a back-end IT system? I mean Google. I mean Facebook, I mean Alibaba, I mean Amazon, right? They're all the data, your personal data, sits in private back-end IT systems on today's internet. We think there will be a second layer that doesn't replace the first layer, but will be an additional layer providing additional utility, which will be this public IT system layer. And just as today, you have the protocols and standards, and you have operating systems and databases that power today's internet. In the future, you will have broadcast protocols, operating systems, databases for public IT systems. Blockchain will just be one of them. We think of blockchain as an operating system, but it will only be one of the operating systems. There will also be new kinds of database technology. We actually think about NFT, if you think about it, as a database, right? And in the future, there will be different types of database technologies that enable this. So we're very early in what we think is a revolution here. We often say that if you think about the evolution of the internet, we're at 1993. And for some of you, you may not have been around or you were very young at that time, but I remember it very well. And the internet of 1993 was very, very different than the internet of today. But that's where we are with blockchain today. So the mission for the BSN, or the Blockchain-Based Service Network, is to promote this concept of the public layer of the internet and to build the software, the fundamental cloud software, to help power that. But we're not doing that on our own. We're doing it in partnership with people like GFT, with people like Industria, who you'll meet later today, as well as other partners around the world. I mean, we're a company of 200 people, right? But we're on a big mission to try to change the world and change the way the internet works. So we need partners to go along with us. So why are public IT systems interesting and valuable? 3 key things: transparency, easy connectivity, and data ownership. I'll give you examples of each. Transparency. Today, lottery systems in many countries are full of scandal. People are skeptical about how the random numbers are generated, if they're duplicates. We are working with an organization to build a public lottery system on a public IT system so that a random number is generated via a smart contract that's open source that anyone can see. That lottery tickets are generated as NFTs that are unique and can be proven. Right? So that's one example of how public IT systems can enable transparency. Easy connectivity is another benefit. Most of you, particularly if you're in the banking world, know of SWIFT. SWIFT, if it were controlled by multiple parties, would be a great example of a public IT system. Because any organization, any financial institution in the world can, through one connection, plug into a network of over 11,000 other institutions. That's an example of a public IT system. Again, if it were controlled by multiple entities. And then the last is data ownership. Today, when you browse around the internet and you have transactions with Amazon, or you have transactions with other businesses, those transactions, your personal data is going into their back-end IT system to be processed. In the future, whether it's 5 years or 10 years, there will be a whole business around personal data vaults. So that all of your personal information, could be your health information, it could be your credit card information, will live in a personal data vault, and you are the only one who has a private key. And if a business wants to transact with you on the network, that transaction no longer takes place in their private back-end IT system. It takes place in your data vault. And in fact, one of the use cases that I'll show you later today is a real company, a publicly listed company, that is in the early stages of building a health record data vault, personal data vault. And I'll talk more about that. So one of the things that we often talk about is consumer data and GDPR. Whether it's 10 years or 15 years, laws like GDPR may not even be required. I mean, today with GDPR, it's kind of up to companies to comply, right? In the future, in a world where there are personal data vaults that each individual controls with a private key, you wouldn't even need regulation like GDPR, because there could be a law that says no personal data can sit in a private back-end IT system. It has to sit in an individual's personal data vault. And that's what this technology enables. So our goal, in the short term, our goal is to enable mainstream businesses and IT operations to use blockchain, and specifically public chain technologies. The long-term goal is to provide experimentation and have people innovate with this concept of public IT systems, and eventually build an ecosystem around creating this new public layer. So this is the big picture, what we're trying to do. For the rest of my talk here, I want to talk a little bit about, okay, how are we actually doing this? And are there really people who believe in this and are using it? So we have 2 key technology stacks. The first one is called Enterprise BSN. Enterprise BSN enables data centers and clouds to add blockchain environments that make it much easier for them to build applications around blockchain and manage networks. I'm going to talk very briefly about that and give you 3 examples. The second is public BSN. We've launched 2 networks. The first network is a network that we launched in China. So just like the internet, there are different rules for how the internet has to operate in China versus outside of China. It's the same for cloud. If you ask AWS how many networks they have 2. One in China, one outside of China, and they're not connected. And they have to do that in order to comply with Chinese regulations. So we launched a network in China in January of last year, and I'll talk very briefly about that. More importantly is the network that we launched in September outside of China, called Spartan, which is a public network that integrates non-cryptocurrency public chains as an infrastructure. So keep this picture in mind as we go through it. So very quickly, Enterprise BSN is an enterprise software platform that we built that integrates over 40 different blockchain protocols. Corda, Ethereum, Fabric, pick a protocol, we've integrated it into Enterprise BSN. So over 40 different protocols. So why did we do that? Again, back to the analogy of operating systems. We think of blockchain as operating systems. So for the people in the audience who are around my age, you will remember the days when there was more than just Linux, Windows, and Mac OS, right? In the 80s, every PC OEM had their own operating system, right? There were hundreds of operating systems. And this collapsed into 3 or 4 major operating systems. So we think with blockchain will evolve, but in 20 years, there are not going to be 40 or 50 blockchain protocols, right? So there's going to be an evolution. So we integrate all of them into our infrastructure because we want to give technology of choice, particularly in the early days of blockchain. So what it enables businesses and organizations to do is very easily build blockchain applications and manage networks. But this is for large enterprises. I'll give you 3 examples. We have a government in Asia, not China, but in Asia that I can't name, that has a shared blockchain platform that is the blockchain infrastructure for every government agency and every department in that government that is building blockchain applications. This is Enterprise BSN. Our software sits in this government's private cloud as the whole of government blockchain platform. And it's the first that we know of whole of government blockchain infrastructure. So we launched this in late June, and there are nearly 10 agencies and departments in this government that have built blockchain-based applications. So for example, tracking the provenance of pharmaceuticals, land registry, digitizing land registries, digitizing intellectual property applications. There's even the weather department is doing a blockchain-based IoT network, right? And so what this government realized when they started experimenting with blockchain was once you start to build multiple applications on multiple different chains, it quickly gets very complicated. And so they've installed Enterprise BSN, and this is now the shared blockchain platform in that government. The second type of user here would be a cloud service provider. So we're doing a pilot in 2 countries right now where these cloud providers are installing the Enterprise BSN software into their data centers so that they can offer blockchain as a service to their enterprise customers. Because today, if you're a business and you want to set up a Fabric network or a Corda network or something like that, you have to go up, you have to buy cloud resources, you have to install the software, you have to set it up. It requires a lot of very highly specialized people to do it. By providing blockchain as a service through these cloud providers, it's 2 or 3 steps. Pick what framework you want, click a button, and you immediately deploy a network. So that's the other type of user. And the third type of user is big multinationals. So we have a big multinational that we're working with that has a blockchain-based invoicing system that involves hundreds and thousands of their suppliers and contractors. All of those nodes are hosted on the enterprise BSN. So this is enterprise level software for big organizations. So now let's talk about public BSN. As I mentioned, we launched a network in China that is unique to China, that complies with a bunch of Chinese regulations around KYC and how data can be used and how you have to register. If anyone has ever been to China, you know that some of the sites that you know and love outside of China are not available when you go to China. This is very similar in this network. It has to comply with Chinese regulations. So this network integrates 10 versions of public chains that we call open permission blockchains that comply with local regulations. So 1, they don't have cryptocurrencies because cryptocurrency is banned in China. 2, they have KYC. So if you're a business and you want to register on this network, you have to do KYC in order to comply. And these blockchain protocols that we've integrated into this network comply with the regulations in China. There are versions of chains that many of you know well. Ethereum, we've even done a version of Corda that complies with Chinese regulations. We're the exclusive provider of Corda in China, as well as some of the other big public chains. So we launched this at the end of January. By August, we had over 1,300 platforms. Think of those as businesses. Over 1,300 businesses have registered on the network and are using the network for their business. This is everything from, of course, there's some NFT marketplaces, but there are also traditional businesses that are using it for intellectual property certificates, are using it for utility tracking. We have over 20 million wallets registered, and DDC is the name for NFT in China because the Chinese government doesn't like NFTs because it's associated with cryptocurrencies. So we changed the name to DDC. I think most interestingly, we launched the network in January. At the end of June, for the first time, the number of transactions on our network just in China exceeded Ethereum globally. And we've never gone below that. So every day on this network in China, there are 1.2, 1.3, 1.4 million transactions. So several 100,000 more than are on Ethereum globally around the world. That's a big deal. Ethereum's been around for what, 5, 6, 7 years? This network was launched in January. So it took less than 6 months. So what does that tell us? One thing it tells us is that there is an appetite for public chain technology that doesn't involve cryptocurrency. And I believe that story is even stronger this week than it was 2 weeks ago. So let's talk about what we're doing outside of China. In September, we launched what we call the BSN Spartan Network, which has some similarities with what we did in China. It integrates versions of public chains that don't use cryptocurrencies. But unlike in China, this network is anonymous. There's no KYC. So 3 key components. One is the Spartan Data Center software. Anyone can go up to the BSN Foundation website, which is based in Singapore, and download the virtual data center software and set up a data center, a virtual data center on the Spartan network. It's free, it's open source. All you have to do is provide an email address, but it could be like a Hotmail address or a Gmail address. You make it up. It integrates right now 3 different public chains or non-cryptocurrency versions of public chains. So what we did is we worked with partners to do hard forks of Ethereum, Cosmos, and Polygon to create versions of those chains that don't use cryptocurrencies. Everything else is the same. If you use the non-crypto Ethereum and you want to use MetaMask or any of the other middleware that are associated with Ethereum, everything works fine. It's the same. But there's no cryptocurrency. So users pay utility fees in fiat, in US dollar, or if you want to be anonymous, USDC, because we believe that anonymity for some parts of the community are important. So the wallets are locked. There's the utility token, but it can't be transferred to another wallet or data center. So what we've done is we've taken the speculative asset, part of the public chain, and taken it out. And the reason we did that is because traditional businesses don't want to be involved in cryptocurrencies. This was true in May when we first started talking to companies, and I'll show them to you. It's even more true today, right? No one wants any exposure or involvement with cryptocurrencies. So this is very timely. So not only do you not have to be involved in cryptocurrencies, but the fees are very low. So let's take a benchmark that we often use is making an NFT. So an ERC 721 NFT, if you're building that on Ethereum, it could cost $5 US, it could cost $10, it could cost $100, based on what's happening with ETH on any given day. On our network, to create an ERC 721 NFT is 2 to 3 cents US, and it's stable. So why is this important? If you're a traditional business, you have to have an IT budget. If you make revenue in fiat currency, which I think everyone in this room makes revenue, or most of your revenue in fiat currency, you can't have operational costs in ETH or FTT or any other kind of cryptocurrency. You can't touch it. How can you, even if you could, from an accounting perspective, you have fiat currency coming in your revenue, and you have cryptocurrency on the operational side going up and down. It's unpredictable. How do you make an IT budget with that? So that's the other key benefit here, is it's not volatile. It's stable. You can count on it. You know next month, next year, what your costs are going to be. And the costs are very low. This is important because, as an example, it makes people think about NFTs in a different way. We have a POC with one of our customers in China. Emperor Group is the name of the organization. It's a big Hong Kong. If you've been in Hong Kong, you know Emperor Group. It's a big conglomerate. They own all the movie theaters. They own all the jewelry stores. They do land development. They do a whole bunch of things. They did a POC at our launch and are going live in December, issuing movie tickets as NFTs, because they can then connect that to their other properties as a way to engage their customer base, right? You couldn't do that with Ethereum. If it cost you even $5 to mint an NFT as a movie ticket, there's no way you can do it economically. It's 2 to 3 cents, right? So it changes the way that you think about NFTs as a technology. In China, we did a pilot with a big Western brand, La Prairie, the big Swiss skincare brand. They wanted to use NFTs as a way to engage their audience, but they were trying to do it in China where you can't use cryptocurrencies, and they wanted to do it for very low cost. So we did it for them on our network, and they minted 5,000 NFTs that enabled them to connect with their customers. So it changes the way that you think about how you can use the technology. So when we first announced this network in May, I have a very small team in Hong Kong, and we went out and talked to about 20 traditional businesses in Hong Kong. Everything from some small startups up to some big global publicly listed companies. And what we came in to explain was this concept of public IT systems and BSN Spartan and non-cryptocurrency public chains. And the way that these meetings went was very interesting, and it was very different from what I expected. Because the reason why we did this is we wanted to have use cases to show at our launch. So we went in, and what I expected was they would come back and say, okay, we need to have more meetings, we need to think of ideas. In probably 80 to 90% of the cases, after 30 minutes of us explaining this concept of public IT systems, they came back and you could see the lights go on. And these were IT people we were talking to, right? This is not CEOs. This is traditional IT people. And they got it. And they said, look, I've always been interested. We've heard about public chain technology, but we've never been able to do anything with it because it involves cryptocurrency and it's hard and all of that comes with the complications. So in most cases, they came back and gave us use cases. So we worked with them to help build these POCs. And when we launched on September 6th, we had over 15 companies showing POCs that were working applications, smart contracts on our network. And they came up and spoke at our network. One of them, HSBC, I don't know if there are any HSBC people here, but your folks in Hong Kong said to us, yeah, we want to speak at the launch event because we're really proud of what we're doing and we think it's really interesting and innovative. Are you going to have a press release? And we said, well, we're not sure yet. We're still working on our plans. You know, we're kind of a small company. And they said, look, we actually want you to have a press release and we would like to be quoted in it because we want to be very clear that we're interested in this technology. And part of the reason we like it is it doesn't involve cryptocurrencies. So we did a press release. We had HSBC, among other customers, speaking about what they're doing in this POC. So what are people actually doing on this network? So Fujifilm was one of the companies we went and talked to. And Fujifilm has, among other businesses, a document management service that they do. And they want to do it, they've done it now on Spartan. So they're using the non-cryptocurrency public chains and the Spartan network to create semi-fungible tokens of documents. And they can then use the network and the chains to track those documents as they go through multiple signatories. So if you know in a document, right, DocuSign or things like that, you've got to transfer the document, but you'd never know what's happening with it. Now through this, you have the transparency. If you're one of the signatories and you have a key, you can see, or I can go look, okay, these 3 people have signed it. We still have these 5 more waiting to sign it, and this is all tracked. So Fujifilm is actually going to go to production with this as a service. Prenetics. Prenetics is another interesting one, and I think Prenetics actually operates here in the UK. They're a NASDAQ-listed company. They're headquartered in Hong Kong. For anyone who's visited Hong Kong in the last 2 years, Prenetics, you'll know Prenetics well because the Hong Kong government outsources all their COVID testing to Prenetics. So anytime you go to get a test in Hong Kong, which we do very frequently, you're dealing with Prenetics. What Prenetics also has created is a consumer DNA testing kit. So you go into a store, you buy it's called Circle DNA, you buy their DNA testing kit, you do a swab, you send it in the mail. 2 weeks, you get back a big PDF report that says, you know, what's your ethnic background, what are you allergic to, what health issues might you have. And Prenetics did a really interesting piece of market research where they found that 40% of their target customer base wouldn't use the service, even if it were free, because they were worried about what was going to happen to their DNA sample. Is someone going to send it to China? What's going to happen? Is someone who knows about what I have? And so one of the use cases that they're working on now is a decentralized DNA testing, so that when the sample goes to the lab, even the lab can't connect the sample to the individual. Only the individual who has the private key can connect the 2 pieces of information. So what they did, and so that's in the early stages, what they did for our launch event was they created a decentralized COVID testing. Again, same concept. When the sample goes to the lab, it's disconnected from the user's identity. So even the lab doesn't know who the person is, but if that individual later needs to show their negative COVID test at the airport or to some authority, they have the private key. They can show the negative test, and the agency or the authority, whoever, can validate that, yes, it is in fact connected to that person. But the lab or no one else knows. So again, this is the idea of putting the power of the control of data back into the hands of an individual. So the other thing that Prenetics is working on, this one is early stage right now, is that concept I talked to you about of a health care record vault. So instead of your healthcare records being in your doctor's back-end IT system or a hospital's back-end IT system or an insurance company, you have your own patient healthcare records vault. This is a business, right? They can create a business out of this. So all that data you control. So if you go to a hospital, you go to a doctor, you have a key, and you can decide what portion of that you disclose and what type of access you give them. Do you just give them read access? If it's a doctor, do you give them read-write access? It's up to you. So that's a whole business in the future. The last one that I'll talk about here is Maxim's group. And again, for anyone who's been to Hong Kong, you've eaten in a food and beverage shop that's operated by Maxim's. They operate not only their own Maxim's cake shop, Casey knows well there, but they also operate all the Starbucks in Hong Kong and a bunch of them in southern China and Shake Shack, and I mean they have thousands of outlets in Hong Kong. This one was really interesting because we went to talk to their head of IT about this public IT system concept. I started talking, like 15 minutes, and blockchain, here's how we see it, public layer of the internet. The guy said, stop. I have 3 use cases. And he rattled them off, and then he sent an email to his team, and he said, this is what I want. And so they're actually working on these 3 use cases. One of them that they did for our launch event was a queuing system. So they have food and beverage outlets all over Hong Kong with different entities and different IT systems and all that. But they wanted to create a queuing system for their mobile app that looked at the queues across all of their F&B outlets or doing location-based. So if you walk into a big shopping mall in Hong Kong and you're with your family and your kids are young and hungry and maybe crying, you can instantly see which of the F&B outlets around you don't have a queue and go there. They're also going to integrate like VIP queuing and other things into that. But the other thing that they're talking about, which is also really interesting, is supply chain. Creating smart contracts for inventory replenishment. So that you had a smart contract, think of this example, you have a smart contract that has a min-max levels for a particular type of inventory, coffee, whatever. And once the inventory gets below a certain level, the smart contract automatically calls the suppliers in your network to say we're out of coffee or eggs or whatever. And you can have another smart contract that then enables those suppliers to bid on replenishing that inventory, and your smart contract automatically takes the bid that's the lowest bid but has the right amount of inventory that you need for your supplier. All of that can be automated and happen digitally. So that's one of the other ideas that they're working on. So again, when people talk about blockchain, I think people think about cryptocurrencies, they think about financial services, and certainly, those are applications. We're not against cryptocurrency per se. If someone wanted to build a cryptocurrency on layer 2 at the application level in our network, that's fine. Do whatever you want, as long as it's legal in your jurisdiction, right? What we're saying is we don't think you should have to interact with cryptocurrencies in order to use public chain technology. So we've created public chain technology that doesn't use cryptocurrencies. But if you want to build one yourself, that's fine. So again, a lot of people think about cryptocurrencies, financial services. Those are certainly good uses. But the use cases for blockchain with our network go well beyond that. And I've showed you a few examples here. So how is the network governed? This is something that people often ask me. Well, is it proof of work? Is it proof of stake? And how does that work? Our network is a POA, so it's a proof of authority network. It will be governed by what we call the BSN Foundation, which is based in Singapore. Each of the BSN Foundation members will operate a governance node in this network and also share in the revenue of the network. By the end of this month, we will announce the first 5 members of the BSN Foundation, and by the end of next year, we're targeting to have 40. These will be large, globally recognized technology companies, financial institutions that will help govern this network. And they will operate governance nodes, and through those governance nodes, they'll validate transactions, but they will also help regulate the network. So for example, we have 3 non-cryptocurrency chains today. If we want to add a chain, the foundation members have to vote. If we want to change the fees, the foundation members have to vote. If we want to onboard a new member, the foundation members vote. And each member gets an equal vote in that. So again, we'll have 5 by the end of this, or 10 by the end of this year, and then targeting to have 40 by the end of next year. There will be 3 committees as part of this foundation. Like I said, blockchain is very early. It will evolve over time. So we'll have a technical committee that will work on, exploring various technologies. We'll provide grants to organizations. They don't even need to be a member of the BSN Foundation to propose a project. They just have to have a good idea. A business committee that will kind of manage how the network works commercially, and then a governance committee to manage the administrative processes of voting on the network. So this is my last slide, because people often ask, okay, great, really interesting. I'd like to learn more. How do I learn more? I'd like to experiment with the technology. I'm technical. I'm looking at Casey right there, my friend Casey from Hong Kong. He's the type of guy who's going to want to download the database software and set it up and make it work. So you can do all that at the BSN Foundation website. So we have a white paper, 40 pages going through the details of what this is. We have a quick start guide for how to set up your own virtual data center. A common question that people ask is, okay, I have to buy cloud resources to set this up. How much does that cost? So we did a benchmark. If you were to set up a virtual data center of Spartan, it's around 130 US per month for cloud resources. Now that's just like the rack rate, right? If you go up to AWS's website. If you're a big organization, obviously you're getting a much better deal than that. But it's very lightweight. So I would encourage anyone who has interest in this, wants to learn more, go up to our website. Certainly I'll be around here during the networking session and happy to talk to anyone who's interested in learning more about what we're doing. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Tim. That's really helpful. Very interesting as well, and the use cases that you're talking about on the public chain, non-crypto. Very interesting. And as it comes to questions, we want to move at pace. There isn't kind of breaks for networking, and also we'll be there as you walked in, there was an area where you're collecting the badges, and we'll also collect any questions that you've got, and then we've got the panel session later to answer questions as well. So to move on, I'm going to pass you over to David Correa from GFT. Do you need to...
Can you hear me? Oh, is the mic? Okay. Okay, so assuming you can all hear me, before I start, I want to ask you, have you ever been in a situation where you feel that you're in the right place at the right time? I have. I've been in that situation many, many times. And I think that all of us here in this room are actually in that situation now. Because right now, we're at the start of a revolution in finance, and that's through CBDCs and e-money. I'm David Creer, and I'm going to be explaining to you what CBDCs are, so a little bit of an introduction into that. I know that some of you know this quite well, so we'll go through this relatively quickly. But obviously some of you don't know it that well, so it's good that everybody's on the same page. We're also going to speak about where we are now, so what point we are today. We're going to speak about the benefits of CBDCs and e-money, and we're going to speak about the challenges that there are. And then we're going to speak about the future view, so where we're going to be in 5 years from now. So to be able to think about CBDCs on e-money in general, we need to think about where we've been in the past. So how many of you here really think that you know what money is and where it's been before? So not many hands there. So money, as we know it today, really started with bartering systems. So this is a very simple thing here. So we've got, I give you a fish and you give me a bag of rice. And rather than just having let's say a one-off agreement, in 9000 BC, and this was all in the Middle East, there were some systems which basically set up the rules and ideas around how that would be done. So if you have a fish, it's worth 3 bags of rice, for example. And that was the beginning of organized trading of goods, basically. And this is how currencies effectively started. On top of that, and this was again in the Middle East, what is today Iran, we then had merchant loans. So this is the logical next step. So this is basically the same as the bartering system. So I give you a bag of rice, but rather than giving you that bag of rice, I'm going to give you the bag of rice in the future. And you're going to remember and you're going to note that down. So that was the logical next step. After that, we had the Lydian stater. Now, the Lydian stater is the world's first coin. And this was a massive change. So this meant rather than having a note for all of the individual vendors that you have here, that you could basically use that coin as a reference of value. So rather than owing an individual, that amount of money that you owed, or that amount of value that you owed, was put into a coin that you could take with you. And the Lydian Empire grew a lot because of the fact that they had this coin and their commerce could be created more easily, more flexibly. This was the world's first coin. And from that, we had other coins. So we had the florin currency. So the florin currency was from Florence in Italy, and it was actually used across Europe. So you also had it being used in Germany. There was a German version of that was used. And the thing that's interesting about the florin is not the actual currency itself, but the fact that it predated banking. So the florin currency came along, and that was used in Florence. But then very, very shortly after that, we then had banks. The first banks in the world were in Florence. So this was another massive revolution for money, right? We then had the first central banks. So the first central banks were in Sweden, so you have the Riksbank as being the world's first central banks. And the funny thing is that, at least in my maybe simple view of how things were, the commercial banks, in my mind, came after the central banks, but that's not actually the case. So first we had the commercial banks, and then we had the first banks, and then we had the central banks to be able to help and control them. And so this is the next step in the financial, let's say in the history of currency, M1 money. So that's a big thing, right? We then had paper money. So this was from China in the Han Dynasty, basically printing paper money. So you no longer had to walk around with a pocket full of coins. You could actually transfer that to a new medium. And the interesting thing here is the differences in time, right? So if you look at, we're talking bartering systems here from 9000 BC to 2000 BC here, to merchant loans, we're talking about 7,000 years, right? Between that and the first coin, we're talking about another maybe 1,000 years. From that to the first coin, to paper money, we're talking about another 3,000 years. So it's a huge jump between a coin and paper money. And the reason that that's interesting is because then we move very, very quickly onto credit cards, right? So we're talking about credit cards, which is obviously something that happened in the States with American Express, lots of other different people who were doing similar things at that point in time, but American Express really popularized it. And then we have online payments, basically being able to pay using an account that you have, for example, with PayPal or now with Stripe, or these kind of companies. And again, things are just accelerating a lot. And the next thing that we have on here is obviously the CBDCs as being the next part in the evolution of money. So as you can see, we have a huge amount of changes here that have been going on over the years. And all of these changes have been pointing towards using money in a more, let's say, efficient and frictionless manner and a more safe and secure manner, right? And this is what we have today with the first CBDCs that are being rolled out. And in fact, we'll speak about that in the next part of the presentation. So a lot of people think about CBDCs, and they get a bit confused about whether a CBDC is or e-money is related to crypto or fiat, and where it fits. Well, it's got some elements of both. So we have here, it's a peer-to-peer and programmable money, obviously, and there's different distribution models. We'll talk about that later. But in that way, it's kind of similar to cryptocurrencies and also to fiat money. It's a digital medium of exchange, so it can be used only digitally. You don't have any physical item that you're going to be giving to people when you're exchanging it. And it's using private and public key cryptography. So you're represented by one private and one public piece of code. On the fiat side, you have an unlimited supply. So unlike your cryptocurrencies, you're not going to run out of, let's say, like Hong Kong dollar, for example. It's issued by a government. It's not issued by a private entity or issued by a stable coin holder, for example. And it's centrally issued, so it's not issued by people who are, for example, mining and then having lots of different miners being able to kind of create that. And the value is determined by the actual market itself. So it's not. So the value is determined by the interest rates rather than the central bank, rather than necessarily how it's being used and the supply and demand that there is, which is the way that it works with cryptocurrencies. Saying that, it's definitely not crypto. So this is one thing that I think people often kind of misconstrue, and this is definitely a massive issue for adoption in certain countries. So in certain countries where you have a lot of crypto use and a very kind of like anti-crypto stance from certain governments or financial services institutions, there's a lot of misconceptions about CBDC somehow being related to crypto. It's not the case, and it will never be the case. They're completely different, and they work in a completely different way. So the main thing is that they've been designed for payments. So when you use a CBDC or you use digital money, and we'll speak about what the difference is between digital money and a CBDC in a second, what you're paying for today is not going to change because of fluctuations in the market. So if you buy, I don't know, you go to the store and you buy a pot noodle, it's going to cost you $1 today and $1 tomorrow. The other thing is that supply and demand won't fluctuate. So there will always be enough, as I said before, digital euro, digital sterling, whatever it is, to be able to cover the use of that country, because the supply and demand is issued by the central bank, or it's issued by the stablecoin provider. There's a heavy, heavy focus on regulation and legality, and that's much more heavy than people realize, actually. So, for example, let's say if we take the EUAN as an example, they were starting their regulatory and legal investigations about 5 years, maybe a bit more than that, 6 years before they actually started any kind of pilot. So all of that build up to something that can actually be used in a pilot has been preceded by a huge amount of work by all of the, let's say, the regulators in that particular country. So that's completely different to a kind of crypto setup, where the technology comes first, and then we're trying to regulate on top of the technology. The other thing is that, excuse me, the other thing is that this technology should be available to everybody. It shouldn't just be available to people who understand how to use it, can have a wallet, need to set up a wallet in let's say, an exchange. It should be available to everybody in the country. So that's very different to how crypto works at this point in time, where you have to go to a private institution to be able to get it, or you have to be able to set up a wallet, maybe using a USB stick or something like that. It should be as available as money is at this point in time today, as fiat is. There are some similarities in the technology that it uses. So a lot of there's a lot of different ways of approaching CBDC design and technology, and at GFT we're working with a lot of tech companies that are approaching it in different ways. Some are using, let's say, like DLT to underpin it. So Corda or a digital asset, for example, are taking that approach. Others are creating tokenized systems, whereby they're using tokens to be able to represent, and then others are using accounts to be able to represent the actual CBDC itself. In all of these cases, the transactions are cryptographically signed, and that's very important, and that is taken from the crypto world and brought into the CBDC world. But it doesn't mean that we're actually dealing with a crypto here, even though they're cryptographically signing the transactions, because they're doing that in a centralized way rather than a distributed way. So there's no proof of work consensus, any of these kinds of things generally with these kind of projects. And one of the major changes, the big thing here, and it really is very important, is that in the future, CBDCs could be legal tender. People often think about legal tender in a slightly wrong way. Legal tender means that if you bring a bag of money, and money is legal tender, if you look at a £10 note, it says the bearer of this £10 note promised to use this as payable or something along those kind of lines. What it means is not that the shop or the organization has to accept that if they don't like the denomination. What it actually means is that you cannot be sued or taken to court in the case that you have offered to pay somebody with that legal tender. So CBDCs in the future, at least in my opinion and the opinion of many others, will be legal tender. And what that will mean is that they'll be accepted by the majority of businesses. They'll be accepted by and custodized by a lot of banks, and everybody will have access to them. And that's completely different to crypto. Whereas in some countries, now crypto is becoming legal tender, but it's only a very few countries that might happen. And it's definitely not going to happen in the major economies, because that would provide a massive risk to the economy of the actual the country itself. Another thing, as you know, a bit of an intro, and I'm sure that most of you know about this, but there's two types of CBDC, right? So a CBDC is basically a digital asset which is issued by the central government, and it can be used for payment for services or goods or whatever it is, and that can be for the payment of wholesale services or for retail services. So wholesale services is basically between banks themselves, so how they settle money cross-border or even inside the actual country itself. Or it can be retail, so if I want to go to a shop and buy myself a newspaper, then I can use it that way. So we have those two different, let's say, options that are on the table. Interestingly enough, we saw that at the beginning of the CBDC, let's say, revolution, we saw a lot more uptake in the wholesale world, and it looked like there was going to be much more wholesale CBDCs that were going to be more popular and more used. We had a lot of projects, especially in the APAC region, around that. Funnily enough, it's now retail that seems to be the popular choice for a lot of the central banks, and a lot of the wholesale projects are working well and they've been put into production, but there's a huge amount of work going into retail CBDC. So it's definitely not the case like it seemed to be maybe 5 years ago, where wholesale was the main thing that was going to roll out to production, and retail was really more of an experimentation that was happening in just a couple of countries. So a lot of people speak about digital cash and e-money. And there's a little bit of confusion around that because, well, what's the definition of that, and how does that connect to CBDCs? How does that connect to private digital cash? Well, when we think about e-money, what we're actually speaking about is collectively any digital asset that can be used to represent a form of payment as an alternative to fiat. So very broadly, we're speaking about central bank digital currencies, which is what we've just spoken about in the past 5-10 minutes. And we're talking about stable coins. So stable coins, as most of you will know, are pegged to a stable financial entity. So that could be gold, that could be currency. A lot of the time it's a currency, so the US dollar, the euro, Hong Kong dollar, whatever it is. And they use that to be able to not fluctuate, so that in the case that you want to be able to make a payment for it in the same way as a CBDC, you're not going to be paying one price one day and another price another day. The thing that's different with the stable coins is that they are using traditional, let's say like DLT technology, so either on public or private networks, to be able to underpin the actual digital asset itself. There's a lot of different options here. So stable coins that are created in public, obviously I have USDC, USDT, and we'll look at those in a second. But you have Corda or Digital Asset that are offering stable coins, or Hedera, that are offering stable coin facilities as well. So we have a kind of mixture of different options, and it depends on what you want to try and do in terms of stable coins as to which technology option you would take. The interesting thing for me is that these different types of e-money will actually have to work together in the future. So even though we see that probably stable coins are a stepping stone to CBDCs, so maybe before we have the digital pound, we might have USDT becoming regulated and legalized here in the UK. Maybe not, but possibly. If that is the case and they are regulated payment systems, then we'll be in a point at which we'll have the digital pound potentially as a pilot, and we'll also have these other types of stable coins available as well. So there will be an interaction between these, and we'll speak about why that makes things complicated a little bit further on. So that is very broadly what e-money is, and previously to that, that's what CBDCs are. So I'm going to quickly go through where we are today. So we've looked at what it is, and now we're going to look at where we are today. So this is a great site. You see the address here, called the CBDC Tracker. It's set up by a few people that we know. And it shows you the state of where we are at this point in time. It's got information about where each of the individual countries are as well. So if you click on Australia, it will give you the information about the retail CBDC and the wholesale CBDC that's there, for example. The interesting thing here is not, let's say, the individual countries and what they're doing. What I want to speak to you about is about the fact that, you can't really see it very well in the slide, but there are very few countries that are doing nothing. So you have Mexico here, you have a lot of, let's say, like North and Central Africa. And these countries are the ones that really actually have quite significant issues, either socially or social economical or whatever, and they have bigger problems, shall we say. The majority of countries are doing something, have done something, either in the investigation stage or in the pilot stage or even in a couple of cases we have some production cases. So the interesting thing for me is that we have a couple of production cases. So we have the Bahamas Sand Dollar, that was the first production case that we had, and then we also have the Jamdex in Jamaica as being the first two production rollouts of CBDC. But we also have some very significant pilots, and in a strange way, the very significant pilots, especially the EUAN, are much more interesting than the production rollouts. And the reason is because of scale. So although the production rollout, in theory, in the Bahamas is available to everybody in the Bahamas, actually it's being accepted and used by very few people. And I'll explain a little bit about why that is, but that they have some challenges about getting people to use it, even though it's available for everybody who wants to use it. Whereas in China, what they're actually doing is they're getting a huge amount of people in all of their major cities to be able to use this coin. Or to be able to use this CBDC, shall I say, properly. So we're talking about millions and millions of people using this coin right across the whole of China. And for me, that's much more important than actually going live and bringing it to production. It's about having an extended pilot which involves many more people. And that's because of the fact of technical trials. So if you roll out to 100 people, it's a lot easier than rolling out to 10 million. And it's also about functional trials as well. CBDCs are related to programmable money. How does that fit your country? How do you want to issue programmable money? Who is going to be in control of that programmable money? If you do all of that kind of experimentation in production, then maybe you won't be able to cycle back and undo things. So it's really interesting to see how, especially the Chinese CBDC is working and how much experimentation they have done with how many people. It's really quite fascinating, quite impressive. If we speak about stable coins, we have the current market cap is quite significant, right? And the interesting thing here is that the market cap has been affected quite a bit over the last few days. So this is, let me go back here. Oh. So this is how we were when I originally did this presentation on the, when was it? We have the date here, I think it's about a week ago. And since I did this, we had obviously the FTX incident. And the FTX incident, obviously FTX isn't on here, and if you look at the previous slide, you can see that the same coins are represented on here. So you have Tether, USDC, Binance USD, DAI, USDP. But the interesting thing is that the market cap has been affected a little bit. Especially the market cap of USDT. And the reason for that is because the guys at FTX were basically shorting USDT. To be able to regain a little bit of, let's say, some of their profits. It didn't really have that bigger impact on the market cap, but it did make a bit of an impact. But if you, even with this major market challenge, this picture and this picture are really very similar. there's really not that big a change, right? And that's quite significant, that even with a major market event, that the number of investment in these stable coins is actually really significant, and it hasn't changed that much. Binance has gone up a little bit, Tether has gone down a little bit. That's all that's happened. And it's quite interesting. There's obviously a lot of stable coins out there. These are just the main ones that are being used at this point in time, but there's maybe 100 different ones, and they're all backed by different assets. Maybe they're pegged against different types of assets. You have a different selection of different types of stable coins as well. So you have obviously ones that are backed by physical assets. So I said before, gold, oil, for example. You might have algorithmic stable coins that are backed by an algorithm. You have crypto-backed stable coins, which are slightly more risky, I would say. Especially we had the Lunar event. And then you have the ones that are pegged to currencies, which are probably a little bit more standard. So that's where we are today. So that's where we are with our CBDCs and how the market is at this point in time. So what are the benefits of a CBDC? So the benefits of a CBDC, there are quite a few. So the first one is that we are creating a more resilient payments landscape. So when we make a payment through a CBDC or even digital money in general, we have the security that once it's gone through and once it's been confirmed on the ledger, on the centralized ledger, that there's no way that the transaction can be undone. We're signing the transaction as it's going in, and there's no way that that can be undone. There's no potential way that can be deleted or that can be undone or changed. So it creates a more resilient payment landscape in a similar way to potentially crypto payments would, but in a more risk-free way. The main driver behind CBDCs is actually to protect governments and to protect potentially all of us, actually, about the risks of private money. So when Facebook decided to get involved, for example, in digital cash and the DM project, I'm sure all of you know that, didn't end up so well for them. This was quite a big challenge to how governments saw money. All of a sudden, they saw that potentially these tech companies could have currencies that might challenge their own. And that's a huge risk for them, a huge monetary risk that they have to be able to cover. And CBDCs, largely, with the exception of a couple, are driven by that. So again, in China, the CBDC was kind of driven to move away from Alipay and WePay and to have a digital currency that was controlled by the state. That's a massive thing for the central banks, and they really want to be able to avoid the use of private money if they can do that. Another thing is about supporting competition, efficiency, and innovation, a lot of the time through programmable money. So programmable money is going to open a lot of doors for new innovative projects, working in different environments, making money more flexible, and doing so in a regulated way. And again, we are in a digital economy now, and we will be in a digital economy ever more so over the next, let's say, 10, 15, 100,000 years, right? Digital economy is not going away. So using paper money doesn't really make sense in this new digital world. And I'm sure that most of you don't that much anymore. We are improving auditability and usability of money itself. So basically, as I said before, we have the records on the ledger. They're available to the central bank. There's no way that it can be fraudulent. And we can see that there's a clear decline in cash. And because of that, we need to be able to offer, let's say, like digital money options to clients. To the public. Another thing, and this is really very, very important for business, not necessarily for governments, but also for business, and we want to foster. So governments that want to foster business is about cross-border payments and how that's managed. In this case, cross-border payments can be streamlined using these kind of digital currencies. So we can make them these kind of types of swaps with a lot less settlement time between one bank, for example, and another, potentially meaning that we can do, let's say, cross-border payments in a single day rather than having to do it in a few days and it costing quite a lot of money. If we look here at this, we have the kind of functions that we're going to see here. So we have the potential that it will replace cash in the future. And when I'm talking about the future, I'm talking about the distant future. I don't think it's going to replace cash tomorrow. I also don't think it's necessarily going to replace cash as in cash will just disappear, but the usage of cash will potentially disappear. And as people stop using it, then less and less will be issued. It has the same value. I think that goes without saying. I think we spoke about that before. Programmable money is going to be able to make things, make us be able to do more things with our money than we could before. It will reduce costs. So at the moment, there is a huge amount of money that goes into cash management. So how cash is moved around between commercial banks, central banks, minting cash, all of that will just disappear. We also have the reduction of fraud. So, as I said before, we're eliminating the possibility of fraud in transactions, and we have a more traceable, more auditable system. In terms of stablecoins, the benefits that we have compared to CBDCs are that it can be issued by a private company, or it can be issued by a regulated and non-regulated entity. At GFT, we tend to work with some of the more regulated entities, but it could be the case that there's a non-regulated entity that is also issuing its own stablecoin. You can, as I said before, work on public or private technology, so depending on your use case, you can adapt to fit it. It can be issued for external or internal purposes, so we know that a lot of our clients are using stablecoins for internal purposes, so internal settlement systems, for example. But it could also be used to be able to pay for services, for example, or goods. If a stablecoin is designed well, then it should not fluctuate. It should be pegged securely to something that is not going to change. And generally, the way of really issuing a stablecoin which is functioning and secure and people want to use is to have an asset-backed stablecoin. So it should be backed up in the case of any kind of issue, either by traditional financial services assets, investments, physical commodities, whatever it is. So what are the challenges? And I think this is probably the most interesting part, because where there are challenges, there are also solutions, right? So one of the major challenges that we have is around interoperability. So if we think about all of these stable coins and CBDCs, digital money in general, a lot of them are being built in silos. So the e-yuan is being built in one way, the e-krona in another way, the digital euro in another way. It's very different to how USDC and USDT are. They're all quite different. So how do all of these things change with each other? How do they interact with each other? Well, the honest answer is that at this point in time, they really don't. They just work for their own thing. There are governing bodies which are trying to create solutions around these kinds of interactions. So to be able to, for example, you have the Bank for International Settlements, which is working on a lot of these, let's say, like inter-CBDC solutions. You also have the IMF as well. And we're speaking with all of those. We've done projects with them. But there's no global regulator. There's no CBDC police, and there won't be, because there's never going to be a global regulator. Laws are going to be different in each of the different countries. So the way that we have to think about it is that we have to create some kind of policies that everybody agrees on. But to be able to enforce those policies would not be possible. And that's the reason, because CBDCs are being built on different types of technology, and they're being built on different types of distribution models. And also from a more political standpoint as well, we are going to see some countries that want to be more, let's say, working together, and other countries where they don't necessarily want to work together because of the geopolitical situation that we have at this point in time. I am quite optimistic that we will get to a point at which we will be able to, let's say, create a more interoperable world for CBDCs and also for stablecoins. And in fact, GFT are working on a really innovative project, which is a network of different financial services institutions. We're working with some of the banks in this room, and also technology companies and legal firms, to be able to create a network to be able to make these kind of swaps. It's something that's going to come out in the next, I think, maybe next month or two. And I would like to just say, watch this space, because we'll be releasing some information about that very shortly. So please do watch this space on this. But if you don't have those networks available to you, and you don't have any kind of global regulator that says you have to do interoperability like this, then it's a very big challenge. Another big challenge is distribution and usage, adoption. This is really, really difficult thing for people to be able to do. The Bahamas Sand Dollar, for example, it's been issued, it's available, but people really aren't using it because they prefer to use US dollars. They have rolls of bills that they basically use because that's the traditional way that people use money there. So how do these central banks get people to be using the money, and the challenges in the distribution method, right? So they have to work with commercial banks. They have to work with PSPs, and the distribution method has to make sense. There's a lot of different distribution methods that they could do. They could do a central model issued by the central bank. Most of the central banks aren't doing that. You could have a hybrid model where you have the central bank working with the commercial banks and the PSBs, and they have a and they have a role in the distribution and the KYC. You can have a hybrid bearer model where individuals can do peer-to-peer transactions, but then they related to the commercial banks. And there's a lot of different models here. And again, if you relate that back to interoperability, the distribution models are different. So how can you make them interoperate in between themselves? The other thing that's a bit of a challenge for the central bank is encouraging use. So if it's the same, if I go into a shop and I give them, 10 euros, because I'm based in Barcelona in Spain, to be able to buy, I don't know, a meal or something. If it's the same as using my digital CBDC wallet, why would I do that? There needs to be some kind of encouragement, and whether that's a tax rebate or whether that's because it's easier, because you have all of your funds in one place, or maybe you don't need to, I don't know, pay a charge or whatever, which is paid for by your bank. There needs to be some kind of encouragement for people to do it. Otherwise, people aren't going to do it. And one of the key things here is around commercial bank integration. So to get people to start using it and start adopting CBDCs, well, their banks need to also start offering services around it. And what we're seeing is that in these pilots, there's maybe one or two commercial banks. In fact, at the moment, in the digital euro, they've started to do quite an interesting pilot. They will do a quite interesting pilot in Spain with, I think it's 15 commercial banks. But generally, the pilots are just 2 or 3 commercial banks, whereas actually somewhere like Italy has maybe 100 commercial banks. And not all of these commercial banks are going to be able to integrate easily into CBDCs. The CBDC company can say, yes, I provide an API, that you can integrate with. But actually, a commercial bank, as many of us will know, have about 1,000 systems which they need to update when they introduce something. Introducing a whole new set of currencies is a massive challenge for them, especially when they're working with legacy systems. So this is a big challenge. And if this isn't nailed, then the adoption of CBDCs will be affected because people won't have access to it because it's not easy for them to get access to it. But if your bank has access to it, then you can easily get access to it too. And that's the reason that we've started working in this area. We've started to work with Chavanet, which we have Alex Genius in the room here, who we've been working with on CBDC service integration offering. We work with the central banks and the CBDC service providers to be able to understand the implementation. And GFT and Chavanet are hand-holding the commercial banks to integrate into the CBDC. So basically building functional and also technical frameworks to be able to let them get involved in CBDC pilots and launches, and then doing all of the downstream work from that to be able to do, for example, let's say, programmable money distributions. We have a 4-stage approach where we do the integration assessment. So this is basically a planning and architecture system. So we do from a functional point of view, from a technical point of view. We then do the pre-CBDC integration, so basically integration into pilots, then followed by the launch and adoption services when they do go live. And then after that, we're basically doing the supporting, monitoring, building of extra services on top. If you would like more information, please don't hesitate to ask after this. And please feel free to speak with Alex and myself. And we think that a lot of the small tier 2, tier 3 commercial banks are going to need a lot of help with this, because not only do they not really understand why they should be dealing with CBDCs or digital money or crypto. I mean, for a farmer's bank somewhere in, I don't know, Brazil, for example, that's quite a technical deep dive. But also they're dealing with very, they have a lot of legacy software. So to be able to make these changes, they probably have to make big changes in their core banking system. So thinking about the challenges, the benefits, where we are at the moment, what is a CBDC? I would like to think about where we're going to go. So when I think about where we're going to be going, I think about people, because actually, money is not about things, about how you buy things. It's about how you interact with people, right? It's about how you use the money that's going to define the direction of travel. So CBDCs, in theory, should be able to help more people across the world get access to easier money. So we've seen, for example, in China, we've seen them having temporary cards where they have a limited amount of CBDC on those cards that they give to tourists or unbanked people. We're going to see that in certain jurisdictions as well. So we will see potentially more banking of the unbanked. We also are going to see more control over financial services, let's say like transactions, and we're going to see a more auditable flow on payments. We're going to see less cash-driven black market work. This was one of the main things for the digital yuan or the e-yuan, was that they wanted to be able to understand the amount of people, or they had a big hole in the taxing system where a lot of people were being paid in cash, and obviously that's not taxable for them. They want this kind of black market work needs to. They wanted to be able to get rid of it, so they wanted to be able to basically get people to be using digital cash so that they could then charge taxes on top of that. And I think we'll see that all across the globe. There'll be a bit of a lack of need to use other types of forms. So, for example, in some of the developing nations, we have a lot of people using crypto because they don't really have a secure payment system. Potentially, that won't be a need, and it will make it less risky to be able to, therefore, make payments in these places. And for these cross-border use cases, so the remittance systems that we have, we're going to see a lot cheaper and quicker remittances, so quicker and cheaper cross-border payments because of this. The other thing, and this is also related to people, is how will CBDCs be internationalized? And there's a big chance in the future that all of the major economies are going to have CBDCs. But people aren't static. People don't stay in the same place where they maybe started working for the past 10 years. You have people traveling from one country to another. Are they going to change their wallets every time that they travel to another country to be able to work? Probably not. So what does that mean for the global economy? Well, that means that we're probably going to have currencies being used outside of their own country. This is a bit of speculation on my behalf, but I can see that if you have two, for example, I don't know, let's say like Chinese people, for example, who are working in Egypt, and they both have Hong Kong dollar wallets, but why would they go forth and why would they need to have like a bank account there when they could just actually use the Hong Kong dollar? So I think we're going to see much more internationalization of CBDCs. And I also think we're going to see travel corridors. So at one point there was this idea that everybody was playing well together and all of the countries would have a kind of, CBDC network where everything would be kind of connected up together. But I don't think we're going to see that on a global scale. We're going to have travel corridors between probably countries like the US, the UK, the EU, others between different CBDCs as well. And then we're also going to see some global standard bodies. I said before, there's no CBDC police. I don't think there ever will be any CBDC police. But I think that we will have some global standards bodies that are created. They won't be able to enforce this, but they will be able to at least define some policies around it, which are going to be recommendations. The last thing that I want to speak about is around the vision of the future of cities. So when we look at China, we think about the future, not just of the economy, but the future of how people are going to live. And people in the future are going to live in a much more connected way, where your data, the way that you move and the way that you interact, and this is including payments, is going to be automated, collected, and therefore can be used for you to be able to do things more quickly, more effectively, and more efficiently. And programmable money will be part of that. So the way that you pay, for example, for your car to go into the car parking will be via the wallet that your car has that's connected to the infrastructure that you have for your parking. We'll see for payments as well, micropayments in the future. And we'll also see that the governmental SSI wallets, so passports like the digital EU passport that the EBSI is now creating, will be connected also to CBDCs. There will be a link between these two things. And the other thing is, when I think about cities, I also think about virtual cities. So potentially in the future, cities won't necessarily be physical cities like here, the city of London, right? But it'll be the cities in the metaverse that we're creating in the future and how payments are created between them. And I think that programmable money will be able to create new types of payments in new different ways that we can't even think about at this point in time. So I would just like to go back to maybe what I said at that point at the very beginning of this talk and say, I think that we really are in the right place at the right time. And there's so much to see in this world. And there's so many good things that are going to come our way in the area of CBDC and e-money. And if you want to speak to GFT about this or any of the other projects that we're doing, please do circle me out later. Thank you.
Thank you, David. It's the first time I haven't had to tap my watch, but I was in the wings going like this. Come on. No. But look, I mean, that's currency and payments, the history of, and then the new, the new future. So thank you for that. It's cleaner now to talk from Industria, and then we have a break, and we'll take some questions there and try to introduce you to the team as well. Thank you,
Okay,
Kalina.
my microphone's working. Hi, everyone. Let's go. Yay. Okay, so my name is Kalina Tonkovska. I work at Industrial Technology, and today we'll be talking about smart legal contracts. So first of all, who am I? My background is in project management. As you can see, I speak some languages, English, French, and Chinese. This is less important. At Industria, I am the business operations manager, and I also lead the team that works on smart legal contracts. So who are we? Well, that slide is not here, so we're going to go back, and we're going to use this one. Industrial Technology has been in the market for around 20 years. We've been working on delivering enterprise blockchain solutions for the past 5 years, mainly in the finance, but also in other sectors such as supply chain and insurance and banking and so on. Actually, to take off on David's speech, we've been working on CBDCs a lot as well. And right now, our focus as a company has been shifting to legal tech and more to smart legal contracts. So let's talk about what they are. So legal contracts, I wanted to do kind of the history of contracting, but that's kind of hard. So I chose to put Magna Carta from 1215. This is the first English document that described the limitations of royal and government authorities, and it was the first legal English document. So I chose to look at this one. And ever since then, legal contracts haven't been really that much different. We're talking about legal prose and natural language. Up until 1996, and I was actually surprised by the dates. It's the same year that smart contracts were first introduced as a terminology by Nick Szabo. And in the same year, Ian Gregg introduced Ricardian contracts. And we're going to look at what those two terms mean. Then I've chosen 2008, but it's not an exact date that blockchain came and smart contracts started gaining traction. And Ricardian contracts kind of got left behind. And recently, smart legal contracts have become quite popular. And I just don't think that the terminology between smart contracts, smart legal contracts is very explained. So this is Nick Szabo's description of what are smart contracts. It's very loosely defined. It was the beginning of anyone ever mentioning smart contracts. And later he used that term to specify smart contracts within blockchain and cryptocurrency sector rather than look at it from the legal perspective. Now, Ian Gregg's definition, I'm not going to read it, but it's very interesting to look at what he defined as a Ricardian contract. So in his idea, it would start with the legal document first rather than the technology. And what he defined as Ricardian contract is the software design pattern for digitizing legal documents. So it was legal first and then technology. And now what about smart legal contracts? So as we looked at the history, obviously it's very much different. Smart contracts are part of the blockchain environment, and they're used as a piece of code or software that is automatically running transactions within a blockchain. That can be financial transactions, or any other type of data transactions. Now, smart legal contracts, they do have parts of their smart contract within them. They are legal documents, legally binding natural language documents that have parts of their, certain amount of their clauses automated or described in code. So in a way, they do include some part of the smart contracts. But smart contracts are not necessarily smart legal contracts. I hope this kind of explains the differences between the terms. But yeah. Okay, so smart legal contracts, they are legally enforceable, they provide transparency and audit trails, and they have machine enforceable contractual obligations. There are 3 types of smart legal contracts. Just let's see if we have, Yes, we have defined them. So there are the natural language documents that have automated processes. There is the natural language documents with encoded clauses. They're also called hybrid contracts, and this is more widely known as smart legal contracts nowadays. And then there are solely code contracts, which are known as smart contracts. The latter could be a problem from a legal standpoint, so most companies and organizations are more inclined into engaging into either the hybrid contracts or the one with automated processes. So a question that we very often get is, because we implement enterprise blockchain for the majority of our projects, is whether we think smart legal contracts should be running on DOT or not. And smart legal contracts is a standalone solution. It doesn't need to run on blockchain, but it does have certain benefits if it does. So one of them is the identity, the finality of the contracting process, immutability, of changes within the contracting process, security, and automation. So there are many use cases that we can look at when speaking about smart legal contracts. Basically, any contract that is standardized and has the simple logic of if X, then Y can be automated and turned into a smart legal contract. We can use standardized contracts in digital assets, insurance, real estate, supply chain, trade finance, healthcare, and many more. But I'm going to take just a few cases so we can look and see how that actually works. So let's take real estate as an example, right? A very common standardized contract is the leasing or the mortgage contract. It has a certain set of variables that are known. Everything else is more or less a constant static text. If the variables such as trade amount, payment deadline, monthly payments, and so on were to be in the form of a smart legal contract, then that could be automated, and it would control the whole part of the contracting process post-execution. So I think this is actually important to say. Most contracting solutions on the market are focusing on the negotiation or the collaboration phase. So you would see document versioning platforms or products that are making editing and in real time with other parties easier. Then there's the software that helps with the execution. So you have DocuSign, Adobe Sign, and so on. But there aren't really tools that focus on the contract performance. So what happens after the contract is signed? And that usually happens off the network, off the platform, and this leads to disconnected data. It can be any industry really here. It doesn't need to be real estate, but if we take real estate, for example, data of clients, data of the market, data of the houses that are being rented, at what price, it's just distributed between platforms. So this leads to siloed platforms, disconnected data, poor insights, and so on. So smart legal contracts is a process, a tool that helps gather all this data, automate the manual work, and drive insight. So in real estate, we have that, and supply chain. So there is a wide adoption possibility in the supply chain because there are many parties involved, and if we take a simple cross-border trade such as involving documents such as the bill of lading, right? This can be automated with a tool such as Smart Legal Contracts that gathers all of the signatories on the way and ensures that the package is delivered automatically, right? Then we have insurance. In insurance, we have a lot of processes that can be automated, such as claims administration, and that can be done in very simple steps. So we have the predefined contract, again, standardized contract with a few simple variables. Terms of the policy are agreed. They are hard-coded into the smart contract solution. Then we have the events that trigger insurance policy execution. They would be predefined, and the smart legal contract could be connected to a lot of external databases to ensure that those events are looked for. Then there's the execute and value transfer. smart contract policies automatically executed based on those pre-agreed terms. This is the machine executable part of the smart legal contract. And of course, settlement, payout, settlement completed instantly and efficiently. Now this depends on the payment solution and whether that is included within that platform, but that, yes, that can be done instantly and efficiently, especially if it's public blockchain. So yeah, this is a very brief overview, much shorter presentation because I didn't want to get into too much details, but I would be happy to discuss what we are doing in industry in terms of the solution itself and how we are designing it. Any questions right now, or should we move to networking? Okay, great. Well, these are the contacts, and thank you all.
Of people here, thank you. So we took a number of questions at the desk, which we're going to go through. Richard, well, I'll let Richard do the intros, and then the panel can do the same. I think the key bit here is all about blockchain now. What's right and when, and how do you get it done, based on the experience of the panel and hopefully the wider group here. So I'll hand over to Richard, and then we can go from there. We do have an opportunity after this, therefore, to have more questions in the breakout, and I hope you're going to stay for something to eat and some drinks. So let's continue the conversation as we go along.
Excellent, thank you, James. Thank you. Okay, kick off, yeah. Yep. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Richard Dunny. I sit within the GFT UK value creation team. I'm currently responsible for building out the UK DLT practicing capability, working closely with James, the UK leadership team, and David Correa. Today we're going to talk about enterprise blockchain now, for which we have a very qualified panel, and I'd invite them each to introduce themselves. David, starting with you.
Yep, I'm David Correa. I'm the global head of DLT crypto and e-money at GFT.
I'm Tim Bailey. I'm normally based in Hong Kong, and I'm in charge of Red Date Technology and BSN's international business.
Hello, my name is Petko Karamotchev. I am a co-founder and CEO of Industria. Normally I'm in between three cities, so it's London, Vienna, and Sofia. Thank you.
Fantastic. So let's jump straight into the meat of the conversation. So the title of the panel suggests that we're at somewhat of an inflection point in DLT adoption. This is a technology that's been around for 10 plus years. Tim, question for you is, why are we seeing such heightened interest in this technology amongst enterprises?
Why now?
Why now, yes.
Well, I think part of it is, actually part of it is related to cryptocurrency. I think there's been a lot of news, both positive and more recently negative, about cryptocurrencies, and I think that's provided people an opportunity to look at what the technology is beneath those and how it can be used in other places. I think the other is per David's talk, governments very actively looking at central bank digital currencies. And I think then, again, people are interested in that and understanding it, and then the underlying technology that enables that is blockchain. And then I think the third thing is just the evolution and the understanding. I mean, new technologies take time for people to understand, particularly things like blockchain, and I just think that it's not something that people understand in 6 months, and it's taken time for that to evolve. But honestly, I think as I said in my talk, I think it will continue to evolve, right? I think it will look, I think blockchain protocols themselves will look, very different in 5 years and 10 years than they look today.
Excellent, thank you. And it'd be quite interesting to get your perspective on how the Hong Kong market is different from the UK market. It seems that there's more traction in terms of DLT adoption in that region. Is that fair to say? And what's the reason for that?
Well, I'll leave it to my UK-based partners to tell me more about the UK. I will say that Hong Kong is, in many ways, advanced. Part of the reason is Hong Kong is a financial services hub, right? And so is London, but Hong Kong is more so in terms of exclusively. So I think banks and financial service firms were a lot of the first companies to start looking at the technology. So I think that's one thing. The second thing is that the Hong Kong government is doing a lot to promote Hong Kong as a fintech innovation hub. And so I think that is helping accelerate some of the adoption as well. And then the third thing is China. Several years ago, President Xi made blockchain technology a mandate from the government, and not cryptocurrencies, by the way, but blockchain technology. And things work differently in China than they work in the UK or the US or most Western companies, where if Joe Biden told Americans to go focus on blockchain, they would go back to doing what they do and watch TV or whatever they do, right? But in China, when the president says go focus on blockchain, suddenly you've got 1,000 blockchain companies, right? So I think the influence from China into Hong Kong is a third factor.
Excellent, thank you. And a Petco question for you. I think we're all unanimous in our belief in the transformative potential of blockchain technology, but sustaining and building blockchain consortia is notoriously difficult. I mean, in recent years, we've seen WeTrade and B3I shutter. What are some of the business challenges around setting up blockchain ecosystems?
I was very saddened to hear about B3I. we used to work with them for some time in the past. Now, obviously, there are many challenges for the adoption of the technology, and the first thing is probably the confusion with the public blockchains. It's extremely difficult for us to persuade anyone that we are doing something differently. It's extremely difficult. Even right now, after the last 2 weeks and the collapse of FTX, sorry, I said the 3 letters. After the collapse, the digital asset offices of the major UK banks, they kind of told us that for them there's a little difference in between public and private, so there's still a lot of confusion. So the second would be the structure of the consortia. They're extremely difficult to be done. There are conflicting often interests. The second thing is the smaller players are often accusing the big ones of playing as cartels. So there's a lot of allegations. Although the enterprise blockchain means business networks, it's still very difficult to be done. The third challenge is, okay, so if there are no consortia, if there are startups, how do they get funding? How do they get funding? Especially in an area without issuing a token and putting it on a public chain and speculating with it. There's another also issue, and probably it's about literacy, probably it's about education. This is something that we've identified. There's a lot of kind of a wording in terms of consensus and cryptography and zero knowledge proof, which is something that most of the companies literally don't understand, and they will never understand. They want to hear more about use cases. And last but not least, we've identified that still, even within supermodern organizations, they still think very centrally. They don't think decentralized. It's a difficult mindset that they need to change, and probably 10 years are not enough to think. Think about the internet, the early days, and right now. What do people thought? Oh, I have email, I have web pages. What else can I want from this? Now things are completely different.
Thank you. And David, business challenges aside, what are the technical challenges to blockchain adoption, especially given that we're seeing so many platforms and protocols proliferate at the moment? And I suppose that's a cue to talk a bit about interoperability.
Yeah, so I think interoperability is key. There are some standard bodies, right? So you have the Ethereum Enterprise Alliance, for example, but there's no interoperability, let's say, solution out there which can just connect everything. So that's one thing. Another thing is about infrastructure. So how do you actually deploy your blockchain solution? There's a lot of different options, and GFT can, build infrastructure from the bottom up, but work like the BSN is doing to be able to support infrastructure and have networks across a country or even a region like the EBSI, for example, the European Blockchain Service Infrastructure, is hugely important. And without that simple infrastructure, then it's a big challenge for, say, a bank to be able to deploy a node. How do you connect to that? Well, you don't even use an API, you use RPC usually, which is not the normal way of connecting to things. Also, how do you design a smart contract? You kind of get in there and you code it, right? How many Solidity developers are there? Well, there's not hundreds of thousands, there's hundreds of thousands of them, sorry, there's not millions and millions of them, right? So it's trying to find ways to make it more simple to be able to actually develop. Interestingly enough, simplifying smart contracts through DAML, for example, we've got our partners here, Digital Asset today, is also one of those steps, right? So I think that it's quite a complicated thing to build. You have to really think about where you deploy it, how you deploy it, the security of your solution, and any kind of tools or any kind of initiative that makes that easier is obviously helps.
Thank you, David. So turning to the application of DLT in the enterprise context, Petco Industria is quite interesting in the sense that it works across industries. What are some of the, shall we say, standout use cases that you've come across in your time at Industria? It'll be interesting as well to get an example, say, from financial services and one outside of financial services as well.
A couple of outside. Yeah. I must say, we started our blockchain journey probably 5 or 6 ago. It looks like probably 50 years ago. In blockchain years, even more probably. We've tried first the identifying use cases for the public blockchain. We were not able to find. This is why directly we jumped on the enterprise wagon with R3. By the way, if any one of you is working with Corda, just to let you know that we are probably one of the kind of most probably prominent developers with Corda. Now, we've identified many different cases apart from first normally the banking industry. For example, we worked with a couple of POCs with major UK banks that I'm not able to disclose. It was quite successful at that time. Obviously, banks are super conservative. It takes time. It takes a lot of efforts, a lot of persuasion. One of the projects that we did was for a small startup regarding intraday liquidity. Yeah. Very, very interesting. It's called Fintium. We did the MVP for them. Now they're very close to production, so soon they'll be live. In the field of the capital markets, we did, it's like R3 did a couple of projects with SIX, the SIX exchange in Switzerland. This DCC now is, it's almost, they're almost ready. We've worked with Barclays on two occasions in the past. One of them was, I think DAML won the big prize. We were in second or something like this back in 2018 during the DerivHack. We developed a derivatives solution based on Corda and CDM. On the next year, we supported the winner. We kind of created a wrapper between is the CDM and Corda. In the supply chain, a couple of examples. But what would be more interesting are two projects that we did out of the financial services sector, which is extremely interesting for us. One of them is it's called Digital Sandwich. It's a consortium of British businesses. So we do food provenance from the farm to the store of every single meat. We optimize waste. We optimize a lot of stuff that it's happening. Unfortunately, the pandemic slowed us a little bit down, but the project will be live very soon. So you will see it on the news. It's going to be in the national demonstrator of funded by Innovate UK projects. The second is super interesting. It's called Rebalance Earth. It's a very interesting combination of a protection of keystone species, and I'll be a little bit more talkative about it right now because it's super interesting. So that elephant costs around $75,000. Alive, it costs around 2.1 million, even more dollars. Because it creates a lot of change in the forest. And what we're doing is to be able to first track the elephant and then be able to literally convert carbon credits into money paid to local rangers who are not going to convert the forest into a farmland, but to protect the elephants. It's quite an interesting use case. We have tons of others, more than 40 projects finished.
Excellent. And Tim, you touched upon some use cases as part of your presentation. I suppose it'd be interesting to get a view of what the future direction of the company is in terms of what sort of use cases you expect to see harnessing the BSN.
This is a good question. So, I talked about the decentralized testing as an example. I talked about the food and beverage operator as an example. So we're talking to a few organizations who are trying to, I need to be a little careful about what I say here, but are trying to build a KYC platform that would enable an organization to get KYC'd, but then when that organization goes to another entity in that jurisdiction and needs to apply for a bank or a loan or something like that, how do they, do they have to go through the KYC process again? So we're working with an organization in a different part of the world on something like that, that would use, potentially use zero knowledge proof to be able to verify to a bank or someone that, yes, this entity has been KYC'd, they're fine, they have a license, but without disclosing, their KYC information, right? And so I think that's a very interesting one. We're also working with a partner on tokenizing assets in a very low-cost way. And when I say tokenized assets, I'm not talking about cryptocurrencies. I'm talking about real-world assets. Like we're talking to a big land developer in Asia that wants to tokenize commercial real estate as a way to then provide fractionalized ownership and things like that. So those are all real live discussions that are going on. And I, as the last question you asked me about why now, right? I wanted to follow up on that with one point, which is, 2 years ago, when we would be approached, and I mentioned this during the break to someone would call us, I'd follow up, I'd call them, it'd be a big, like a commercial real estate management company. And the typical conversation is, my CEO read about blockchain in The Economist and told me that we need some blockchain, and so I'm calling you, right? And, it's like AI or IoT, or it's a buzzword and they need, give me some blockchain, right? And the conversation, and really that's happened to me probably 50 times, right? And the conversation has changed in the last 2 years where there's enough understanding within the traditional IT community about the potential of it so that, like I said in my presentation, I would go meet with companies a few months ago, and I'd get kind of 20 minutes, I'd get 4 or 5 slides into it, and they would just say, stop, I know what we want to do, here are 3 use cases. And that's changed a lot. But I think, again, that's kind of the natural evolution of how technology works. Like, again, back in the 90s, right, everyone wanted to be an internet company. Well, what does that mean? They're like, a trillion things you can do on the internet, right? What does that mean? And I think blockchain is the same way. People are moving from, I want to use blockchain, to I have this business problem and let's talk about how I solve it. And that's when I think we'll know that blockchain and DLT is mainstream, when people stop talking about it, right? When it's just, it's a piece of infrastructure, it's a tool that people just use, and people stop talking about blockchain-based applications and things like that.
Excellent, thank you. David, next question for you. So GFT globally has been involved in many different types of blockchain projects, particularly within financial services. What sort of solutions are you seeing demand for our help for outside of CBDCs, because we've covered that quite amply already?
Yeah, so GFT has been working in this area for over 7 years now. So we started in 2014. We've done over 30 projects since we started, so got quite a lot of different types of projects underneath our belt. I would say that you could probably largely put these into 3 different brackets. One of them is CBDC and e-money, which I'm not going to discuss. And the other 2 are a DLT for, let's say, like value transactions. So this would be everything around tokenization, anything around smart contracts, all of those kinds of things. And there's a huge number of different use cases that we have around that. So we started off, let's say, with the tokenization of physical commodities. So the tokenization of base metals it was. So basically how you do that, how you interact with an exchange, how you track them as they go around the world. That's kind of how we started off. But we've done lots of different things: derivatives, bonds, even tokenization of energy, all sorts of different things, tokenization of vehicles, lots of different things, right? So that will carry on, and we'll definitely see much more of that. And the interesting thing there is about the public-private thing, right? So when we first started, we were on the public networks, and it was all about tokenization on Ethereum, because really that's all there was. And then after that, especially the financial services institutions, they were kind of like, well, actually we want to keep everything on kind of like private, let's go back to private, because then we can control where the data is, all of these kinds of things. And now what we're seeing again is a kind of resurgence of tokenization on public as well, because of people wanting to get back into that idea of being able to tokenize and put something on the public network. What's better? It depends on your use case really, and what you want to do with that tokenized asset. And then the other thing that we do outside of CBDCs and e-money is we do a lot of crypto custody and crypto projects, basically. And when I talk about crypto, I'm talking about institutional crypto. So building crypto custody for banks or asset managers, or even other types of companies that want to be able to offer their clients a diverse portfolio outside of traditional financial services markets. We work with a number of different partners on that. I don't think any of them are here today, unfortunately, but we build with different types of technology, but we're always using, let's say, like enterprise-grade technology. So, you know, for example, I don't know, like Metaco, Taurus, these kind of technologies which are used by banks to build up their crypto custody side of things. And also we work very closely with our security teams as well. So we have like cybersecurity experts that work within our teams, business analysts as well, who are basically helping us to be able to support and build the workflows that are necessary to be able to build these kind of banks as well. And obviously all of the kind of, you know, the, let's say like the ongoing maintenance of this kind of project too.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think what's fascinating is that in spite of the crypto winter that we had earlier this year, institutional demand for crypto doesn't seem to have abated. In fact, they're plowing full speed ahead.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And you know, we've been part of a few firsts. So we were part of you know, the first institutional exchange here in the UK. It's still very much strong, you know, ongoing thing. We're also the builder of CustoDigit, which was one of the first let's say, like part of the first regulated crypto asset marketplaces with Deutsche Börse and Daura and Swisscoms, and all of those marketplaces are still going strong now, and I don't see any reason why they would stop, because people want to diversify their assets, right? They see the recession coming and they say, well, okay, I need to put some money into different areas, right?
Not too much, though. Okay, excellent, thank you. I'd say many of us equate enterprise blockchains with permission blockchains. BSN's gone down the permissionless route. Tim, I was going to ask you what the benefits of that approach are, but you covered that quite amply in your presentation. So to turn the question on its head, I mean, what concerns do people have with that approach? And how do you reassure your client base that permissionless is the way to go in the enterprise context?
Just to be clear, we in our infrastructure, in the enterprise BSN, we integrate permissioned and permissionless chains, right? We integrate Corda, Fabric, Besu, Quorum, all the big permission chains, and crypto versions of permissionless chains like Ethereum and Algorand and Tezos and these guys. The biggest issue, I think, to permissionless chain adoption has been cryptocurrency. And not just David has, and GFT have helped build a business about helping traditional businesses, have custodians for assets, right? And that's great, keep doing that. But I think there are a lot of businesses who it's hard, right? I mean, they need help to be able to do that. And so the idea that they can use public chain technology that uses MetaMask, that uses Solidity, that uses all the various tools they're used to, and pay in fiat is revolutionary. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing is that when people hear about public chains, they immediately say, okay, everyone in the public can see everything on the chain, right? And that's kind of the immediate reaction, is why would I ever build anything on a public chain? Well, there are big banks who are now building on public, non-crypto public chains. And then you have to explain, well, look, everything's encrypted, right? It's very strong encryption. If people could hack it, if they could hack the encryption and hack wallets and stuff, they're going to go after Bitcoin. They're not going to go after an encrypted medical record, right? An MRI or something like that. So I think those are the two biggest issues, are cryptocurrencies and this kind of misconception around privacy.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. A Pecco question for you. One thing I suppose that spooks organizations that want to make a foray into DLT is the unpredictability around costs, by which I mean processing costs and gas. What is the industry doing to address and allay these concerns?
Well, obviously, this is the reason for us to be here, and this is precisely what BSN is doing. But before that, let us discuss what happened in the past. What was the how the problem, not the problem, how the history was generated in the past. So originally, it was the public chains. The costs were very low of transacting. It seems like a good plan to go, until the CryptoKitties. The CryptoKitties changed absolutely everything. We saw a congested system. Think about using a public chain, like not BSN, but a completely public one, to charge your car or to wait at a gas station, and then 5 CryptoKitties take over you, and you're waiting for half an hour just to pay for something that you did for say 2 minutes. So obviously this, in order for you to take over the CryptoKitties or any of the NFT transactions later on, DeFi transactions, etc., you need to pay more gas. It's like bidding to be on the block. The problem is that we saw last year around, it was May, it was $70, the median price per gas fee per transaction, which was absolutely horrible. In November, it was around 63, and this is not my observation, this is Kraken research. We've reached a peak point when things were absolutely mad. For a $5 ETH domain name, this is the cost per domain name. The transaction fee was $4,700. So this made Ethereum extremely, this made a lot of users extremely unhappy. This made Ethereum completely unusable, yes, the public one, for anything else but speculations. Now the second model of predictability or lack of predictability is the super enterprise model, which is where the pendulum goes to completely the other side, which is I call it the old Oracle and SAP way of asking an upfront fee, which was kind of unbearable for many of the startups, many of the bit organizations, and this is the enterprise model. So probably what BSN is doing and the fact that we are here is something apart from the technology, which is very interesting. The fact that it's here is the extremely low starting ground. So this, it's almost zero. We had a detailed discussion yesterday with Tim about the pricing and the strategy, which I won't discuss right now.
One of the things that I didn't mention in our presentation is that as part of BSN Spartan, we're going to create a smart contract marketplace. So we're pulling together kind of basic marketplace of, the top 50 smart contracts, and we're going to enable, we're not creating our own branded marketplace. We're using this to give to partners, to enable our partners like Industria, like GFT, as a way to kind of kickstart people, right? So if you have a basic open source smart contract for voting or creating an NFT or tracking an asset through multiple organizations, and you start with that basic smart contract template and it's open source, then people can build upon that, right? And the way that we've created the economics of what we're doing with Spartan is, Petko referred to it a little bit, but if you're a high school student or a university student and your usage is very low, you can use the network for free. And so what we really want to see, that's kind of part of what we're doing with Spartan, is we're trying to unleash the next wave of innovation. I mean, all of us here are kind of from the enterprise space, but the next really great ideas are going to come from a 16 or 17-year-old, girl in her dorm room who, gets an idea to build something using a smart contract and comes up with, the next idea that none of us can even think of now. And so I think that's a big part of it and what we're trying to do is provide tools that enable even individuals, not just enterprises, to advance the technology for all of us.
Fantastic. David, anything to add to that?
Yeah, so I think GFT take a slightly different approach to a lot of consultancies in this respect, because we have been working in the financial services industry for quite a long time, and we understand the need for compliance, we understand the need for security. So when we develop smart contracts, we also need our smart contracts to be developed in a way so that they are secure. It can't be the case that a smart contract, which is let's say defining a bond process worth hundreds of millions of pounds, it then has an exploitable variable in it. And that's super important. And I think that sometimes especially the non-enterprise space, people rush in to be able to build smart contracts based on a really good innovative idea, but they're deployed and they're used very heavily for like investment use cases, but there's not really that process of control of how the smart contract's been developed. Has it been reviewed by security and analyst who's a specialist in smart contracts? So we also look at it very much from a security and compliance point of view, as well as just let's say functional point of view and coding point of view too.
Thank you. So final questions, a bit of a crystal ball one. I'd be interested to know, if we were to reconvene in 3 years' time, what would enterprise blockchain look like? So I'll start with you, Petko.
probably some of you remember the late Sun Microsystems. Do you remember this company? Before it got acquired. So they had a fantastic slogan called "The network is the computer." So when I kind of hear about, when I speak and hear about the blockchain, this resonates. Second, I very much like the idea of not having, I mean, in the past we had like siloed computers, siloed isolated servers with some funny, funky language, even standardized using kind of open banking. It's still a fragmented system. Now, what we saw later with the blockchain is a kind of a fragmented networks, which is again another issue. So the questions about interoperability and how these networks are going to communicate started to erupt. Now, probably what we need to see right now is a new network with many different layers, many different protocols. Now, and think about you using a computer like a Mac or a PC and running only .NET or only Mac applications and nothing else. So you can't run Java, you can't run PHP, you can't do Python or whatever you're doing. I mean, it's not a good idea. So think about the network as a wide network with many different protocols, many different layers, and especially if you're able to pay in fiat, I think this is clearly the future, at least for me. And on top of it, applications like not just, I mean, again, think about the early days of the internet and the fact that it was used primarily by military. Now it's the same as blockchain. I mean, it's primarily used by finance people, which is definitely not bad. But I think the blockchain could easily be out of the finance-only area using for many different industries.
Thank you.
So I spent a lot of my career at Intel, the computer chip company, and when Sun Microsystems was saying the network is the computer, we were offended, and we would say, no, the computer is the computer, come on. So if I think about 3 years, 3 years is a very short time. And so I actually think things will evolve, and we'll see blockchain being used by more traditional businesses outside of the financial services industry. I think we'll see that in 3 years, but I think we'll still be talking about blockchain and blockchain applications, right? Like today, no one talks about enterprise internet and enterprise or internet applications, right? It's just the internet is an infrastructure that we don't even see, right? And so I think that's going to take longer than 3 years. And so I think that's probably 5 to 7 years when people just won't talk about blockchain, right? Because it'll just be an assumed part of the technology stack, just like the things that we have today that people don't talk about.
Thank you.
So I think that you've hit the nail on the head there. I think that in the next 2 or 3 years, we're going to see changes in application where we have been experimenting, and that will be based on regulation, right? So Germany in the last 2 years has gone from really not being the leader in this space to being the #1 crypto using economy. They have hundreds of products. All their banks are using it. Why is that? Because there's a good regulation behind it. That's what we're going to see. We're going to see regulators putting in regulation that mean that we can actually build something and put it into production. And we're going to see that on the DLT side. We're going to see that on the crypto side. And then in the long term, it's what you said, Tim. It's about this kind of like ubiquitous omnipresent blockchain for any kind of secure transaction, where that you won't even realize you're using blockchain in the same way that you don't necessarily realize you're using HTTPS when you're looking at an application on your mobile phone. It's just going to be another protocol that underpins high-value transactions. So I think we'll see that. And one other thing is what will happen with the metaverse and the open metaverse. How's that going to fit into, I know it's a bit of a sin word, but Web3. And what's that going to mean for the networks of the future? I think hopefully we'll see a lot of acceleration, and Web3 and the metaverse have been quite good in that respect, that they've given a lot of They've kind of moved people's opinions on about crypto and blockchain, and hopefully that will accelerate innovation and acceptance in the crypto and blockchain world.
Thank you, David, and thank you to our panelists for a very illuminating discussion on this topic.